You're listening to a special feature from The Phonecast, where we take you behind the scenes of the mobile phone industry.
Welcome to a special feature from The Phonecast, sponsored by 51Degrees.mobi, a business that provides device data and device detection for thousands of companies online. I'm Mark Bridge, and today I'm joined by James Rosewell, a familiar voice on The Phonecast and also CEO of 51Degrees.mobi. James, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. Good morning, listeners.
Now, your company 51Degrees.mobi has published a white paper today, a paper that's attracted a fair bit of attention so far already. Could you just talk through, first of all, what it actually looks at?
Well, as a lot of our listeners will know, the 51 Degrees product is deployed on tens of thousands of websites around the world. And some of those websites send us information about the traffic that they get on their websites from mobile devices. And we're then able to use that information in order to keep the product up to date, help us understand what's happening. And as part of that general analysis that we perform, we also get an increasingly good idea as to what's actually happening on the mobile internet. So we're looking at sites that are optimized for mobile. They've made that leap to provide a mobile optimized experience. And we're looking at the different operating systems, different types of devices that access those websites.
So this means that you're able to spot trends in operating systems, trends in manufacturers, that kind of thing?
Yes, as measured by real activity on the mobile internet.
And was there anything from this activity that particularly surprised you, that prompted you to create this white paper?
Well, there were four major trends that came out of this analysis that we thought were worthy of mention in the white paper. You've got to understand, when you process over 5.5 million devices a day, there's an awful lot of data, and you could go into an awful lot of detail in this analysis. So we tend to just look at the high level when we put together the white paper. But there's a couple of things that stands out. Some slightly surprising, some that really reinforce what we've heard elsewhere in the industry.
Okay, well, tell us about the first surprise then, James.
Well, the thing that I think a lot of us have been aware of is more phones have been sold incorporating the Android operating system, and we always knew that as the size of the pond expands, if Apple retain their size in terms of the number of devices that they're selling each month, ultimately that means a reduction in market share. And what we've been able to do is, looking at actual mobile internet traffic in Europe as an example, we've seen a reduction from 47% in July of market share of mobile internet activity to 42.6% in December. So quite a drop for Apple there. Now, I'm sure that rate of decline isn't going to continue, but nevertheless, it really does show that the smartphone wars are not over, and Apple's dominance is unlikely to continue for many years to come.
And this decline isn't necessarily people not using Apple phones, it's simply more and more people using alternative operating systems.
That's right, yeah. And as I say, we're seeing a huge increase generally in the amount of mobile internet activity, particularly to websites that are optimized for mobile.
So this drop in Apple's share in some areas was your first surprise. What else caught your eye when you were putting this white paper together?
Well, just sticking with Apple for a minute and looking at North America, we heard recently reports from other sources that were saying that Android is overtaking iOS, and actually that bore out in our analysis as well. We saw in November last year and then into December, Android overtook iOS in the United States for the first time. Not so in Europe yet, but certainly that's the way the trend is looking.
Was the trend in Europe similar?
It's certainly going in that direction, so you could see in the next 6 months in Europe that the same thing would happen. Android would overtake iOS if things continue as they are. But a lot happens in 6 months in this industry, so you never know, it may not happen. But certainly I would expect it to happen around about the middle of this year in Europe, where Android overtakes iOS in percentage of internet transactions.
Okay, James, we're kind of halfway through the white paper, I guess. You've mentioned Android's increase and Apple losing share. What else did you cover?
Well, we then also did a little bit of analysis on Android handset manufacturers just to see whether they were all experiencing the same type of growth. So these are handset manufacturers that incorporate Android into their portfolio. And we actually saw some really big differences across what I might call the five major players in Europe. So we saw Samsung really going on a sort of phenomenal trajectory. They were going from just under 8% to over 11% during the last half of 2011. And then we saw Motorola declining from just over 7% to just under 5% over the same period. So I realise these handset manufacturers use other operating systems as well, but just interesting to see the trend for those two manufacturers. And then we saw HTC, Sony Ericsson and LG remaining broadly static over the period, varying no more than just 1 percentage point during the period.
Now, those manufacturers aren't all solely Android, but as you say, the difference between Samsung and Motorola is definitely noteworthy in that case.
It is. Samsung enjoyed a stellar 2011. They shipped over 300 million mobile phones worldwide. And that's really borne out in our analysis as well.
Moving on now, James, to other manufacturers. What else did you notice?
Moving on to Nokia and looking at a different geography, we've known for a long time Nokia has been the dominant brand in India, and they've really seen an alarming drop in market share over the last 6 months of 2011 in India. They went from 57.5% in July to 49.8% by the end of the year. So Nokia is still the number one, and by some margin, but quite a big drop. The other new entrants, as you might say, into the Indian market are really eroding Nokia's market share. And I think it's absolutely critical that they get some low-cost Windows Phone devices into the market before Q2 of 2012 in order to start reversing that trend.
Do you think this trend is pretty much down to Symbian not being sold on very many phones anymore?
Well, I don't think it's true to say it's not being sold on many phones anymore. Nokia took a brave move last year of saying actually Symbian's got this life to it. We're going to make another 150 million handsets, and we're probably going to not do much more development with Symbian. There's still a lot of handsets, particularly when they're being sold in India. I think, again, as we were talking about Apple, it's got more to do with choice now and customers prepared to look at other products, notably Samsung in Europe.
So in many ways it's almost a sign of the Indian mobile market growing up, you could say, or at the very least becoming more like Europe, becoming more like North America.
Yes, but arguably already there if you substitute Nokia for Apple in India.
Okay, now there's one manufacturer that you've not mentioned yet. Have you saved the best until last?
Well, certainly if you're RIM, this is great news. We've heard an awful lot over the last year about the decline of RIM and lower BlackBerry sales, and their share price has really taken a hammering. But when we look at BlackBerry and RIM's share of mobile-aware website traffic, they're held steady at 10% throughout the whole period, total flat line. So it's certainly not putting people off using BlackBerry devices to access the mobile web.
So BlackBerry usage keeping pace with everything else?
It would certainly seem that people buying BlackBerry devices are accessing the internet, and the number of BlackBerry devices that are being used is keeping pace with the overall growth in devices accessing the internet. Otherwise, why would they be retaining a 10% share of the market?
We've talked through the 51 Degrees white paper, James. Is there any overall conclusion that you can draw from these figures, from these diverse directions that web browsing, that mobile phone usage is going?
Well, I think the whole mobile industry in its comparatively short life has gone through a number of phases, and I think we're now moving to the second stage, clearly moving to the second stage of the mobile internet, where there's going to be a correction effectively in these companies that just dominate with 40+% share of transactions in both the developing world and in the developed world. I'm talking about Nokia in India, Apple in the Western world. And we're going to see a correction where there's far more competition. We're not going to have that level of domination. We're never going to have the level of domination that Microsoft have enjoyed in the PC market, for example. And we're going to see 4 or 5 big players with 15 to 30% share of the market, depending on country and the various sort of demographic issues that they're going to be experiencing. And therefore, if you're a content owner, there's a real challenge about which technologies do you go for. And what we've seen with the internet is the web technologies are the ones that endure. So therefore, if you're creating content, if you're creating applications, it makes an awful lot of sense for technology leaders to be going down the web route, looking at HTML5 and the various technologies that are associated with it, including, of course, 51Degrees.mobi, who can really help complement these technologies and provide a better user experience.
Now, this white paper of yours, James, perhaps unusually, is free. If people want to get hold of it, where should they go?
They should go to 51Degrees.mobi. And there'll be a link off the homepage to download the white paper over the next couple of weeks. If you happen to be listening to this in mid-February, then have a look at the news section under About Us.
James, that's great. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
You've been listening to a special feature from the Phonecast, sponsored by 51Degrees.mobi, providing device data and device detection for thousands of companies online. To listen online or to download each broadcast automatically, head for our website, The Phonecast, which is ThePhonecast.com, where you'll discover an RSS feed, an iTunes link, and a built-in audio player. If you're using a mobile phone, you'll find our mobile website at the same address. It'll automatically identify the handset you're using and will tailor the information to fit the screen. We also produce regular news updates in a separate podcast every Wednesday morning. You'll find this on our website, on the Mobile News website at mobilenewscwp.co.uk, and on the Independent Mobile Phone Dealers Association site at impda.co.uk. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back next week.